Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I used to be Sam. I am a singer and songwriter and human person. It's an EP and not an album. And instead of just having like one or two singles, I was really um, personally going through something that I hadn't been, I guess, conscious enough for earlier in life. And I needed the music to reflect that. And usually there's such a like cookie cutter way of doing things in the music industry. Like, this is how you release this, this is what you want to do. And I think for my own mental health, I needed to like really remove myself from that. And I was like, each of these songs is a chapter of the story, and I want a visual to go with each of the songs, and I want to release each song kind of on its own. And so that's what we did. It was like a lot of work, but worth it. So for like people who have no idea what we're talking about, which I'm probably everybody, um, I'm adopted and I'm transracially adopted, which is when you're adopted into a household of a partially or totally different race than you, which just adds a few other fun layers of kind of intensity onto your experience, I would say. And those DNA tests were like had been out for a little bit, and I ended up getting one for a present, like a Christmas present, and that kind of like really brought me onto this journey. And I ended up finding my birth father, which has been super impactful and amazing, and ended up getting a really kind of aggressive, threatening rejection from my birth mother, not directly through somebody else. So I've never actually interacted with her in any way. And that rejection like pulled the rug out from under me. It knocked the air out of like my existence. Basically, it's kind of worst case scenario. You, at least for me, and most of the adopted people I've talked to and I've met, your birth mother somebody think about all the time? Does she think about me on my birthday? Does she remember that? Like I'm of this person, you know. So that I really wasn't able to hold on to that pain and that big emotion, and I knew I had to create and I had to like let it go in some way, or not let it go but move through it in some way. And that's kind of how these songs started. And so, for example, the first song, Grateful, was the first song I wrote for the project, and it was more, if you kind of hear the words you'll hear it a little bit, but taking vows to myself of how I'm going to show up for myself in a way that I hadn't before, and how I'm going to create boundaries that I was really incapable of making before this project. And if you check out the videos for each song, there's little pieces and interviews of conversations I had with other transracial adoptees, like 10 beautiful, amazing people. Yeah, that were really open and warm with me, kind of taking baby steps into this process. And it's something most of these other people have been dealing with for a bit longer than I have, or consciously dealing with longer than I have. And so, yeah, it was really important to me to share or to have them share their stories the way that they wanted throughout the song. So that's kind of the different aspects to the project.
I think it is perceived that adoptees should be grateful.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and we see the positivity out of it, but we don't
Oh, yeah.
see, we don't hear or see the other side. I think I've only known a handful of adopted um kids when I was younger, but
Yeah.
you're shining light on a different side of it, which I think
Yeah.
should be heard and be told a little bit, because I mean, I didn't, I don't know about this, and this was new to me as well.
Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point, and that was the main reason I invited other adoptees if they wanted to come kind of hop on this project. And that's the main narrative that is force fed to everybody. I mean, everybody down to like conversations around the family dinner table to in movies or like reunions on talk shows, all of these things. This narrative is so based around the adopters' point of view and around toxic positivity and white saviorism and just general saviorism. And it's so damaging when only one voice is heard.
Yeah.
And now through social media and adoptees being able to reach out to one another, there's now grown adoptees who are like, hey, actually, when laws are made about adoptive people, like when there's movies and narratives, and I mean, all of these things that we've grown up thinking or not thinking about, or only thinking about in a certain way, if you include our voices into these conversations, which for me, I think is a necessity, you'll start to realize there's a lot more to the story. There's so much more to the story. And when we ignore that because it's uncomfortable or because that means there's more work to be done on a lot of grown-ups' parts, whether it's the industry itself, because it's very much an industry, or the parents themselves, it's hard for people to digest for like, but this is something we didn't have to worry about or do more work on. But yeah, everyone does, you know? And so it was just really abundantly clear that our voices weren't being heard, and definitely weren't at the forefront of decision making and lawmaking when it comes to adoption. And I feel really strongly that it should be that way, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how was your childhood growing up with your adopted parents?
Yeah. So I think I'm a perfect example of how, from an outside point of view, you would think nothing could go wrong. You know, I was adopted by two people who I know love me and loved me from the day they adopted me. And I was adopted into a middle class household. So already that's tons of privilege thrown my way, and not a privilege that everybody gets, you know,
Mhm.
or every adoptee gets. So I think from an outside point of view, like, what could I be complaining about? And I think a lot of adoptees get this, but you know, I was adopted in the late 80s after I was like one and something. And during this time, definitely before, and then also into the 90s, I think the like, for way lack of a better term, the like woke parent or open-minded parent of that time was somebody who was totally colorblind. So I was adopted into a house of, you're just like my daughter. You're no different from us. You're, you know, all of these things. And to not, for my differences to never even be acknowledged, created like shame, you know, and I was othered in this way, even though the intent wasn't there. And I really learned that somebody's intent isn't more important than how they're making somebody feel, you know?
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So how was it for me? It was because I didn't have a community of adoptees to like bounce thoughts and feelings off of. It was, I knew something was off and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know I was allowed to be angry about things for a long time. And the feelings of guilt, especially when the narrative is I should be only grateful for these people who took me in, the feelings of guilt really hindered me from being able to even know what I was feeling at the time. And it was only when I kind of came out of the fog, or coming out of the fog now, um, that I can look back with a little bit of perspective and pinpoint the things that were problematic, whether it was nobody knowing to lotion my brother's skin, so he was super ashy, nobody knowing how to take care of my hair, so it like unidretted in the back and people called me rat's nest, like even things down to just like basic hair of our bodies that differed from them, it wasn't even ever
Mm.
considered, you know?
So there,
Yeah.
did you have any? Did they have kids already, or were you?
No, so like a lot of people, they had infertility issues.
Uh,
And so I don't ever think kids should be adopted because you couldn't have the baby you wanted to have. I don't think that's like a reason to do to have zero education on what it means to
okay,
actually adopt
I
another
was gonna.
child.
I thought you were
Yeah.
saying that they shouldn't adopt children. No,
No, no,
but
I'm
I
saying
got it. I
I'm
got it.
saying that like,
They were
but
there.
like part of the trauma is that a lot of times people are adopted because they're fixing a couple's infertility issues. And that's a
Yeah.
lot to put on a child, and a lot to know that, oh, you tried a different way before and that didn't work. So then you picked us. And it's a lot of,
Oh
it's
yeah.
a really multi-layered thing to internalize, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I didn't think of it that way actually. But
Yeah.
and you have a great point because I would think, I mean, if I was going to adopt a child, especially if
Mhm.
it was a different race, I would just, I don't know, maybe it doesn't register with some people, but you have
Yeah.
different skin, you have different hair than I do.
Yeah.
There has different care, you know.
Totally.
I guess people, it's a human nature thing, which is unfortunate, right? Like
Yeah.
you have a child, yet you don't want to do any type of research to know how to care for the
Yeah.
child.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like honestly the lack of education to adoptive parents, even if you're adopting within the same race, um is horrendous. There's no education there. There's nothing about like the trauma of like not being with your birth family,
Yeah.
even if you kind of look like the people you're like adopted into, you know? So to have no education just on like the most basic trauma responses of adoption to kids, and then if it's a transracial adoption, to have no education to the adopters on uh, how to take care of their bodies in ways that are different than mine, how to immerse them in their culture, how to have like racial mirrors for them, like within this community. I think if you, first of all, I think transracial adoption should be like last case scenario because I think people should at least try to be within their culture. Or if you're adopting somebody of a different race, like you really need to think how am I doing this because I want this, or am I doing this because I think this will benefit this child the most? It's really always about what will benefit this child the most, you know? So it's like people are like, well, then you just don't want people to adopt at all. No, it's not that. I just think there's a lot of like systematic work that needs to be done where we need to look at how can we first support the communities where the most kids are getting adopted out from. How can we uplift them? How can we like keep this kid in this family if this is possible? And instead of closed adoptions where your identity is just erased, like you didn't exist before, like your ancestors aren't your ancestors, your birth certificate is doctored and changed so then your adoptive parents are on that, and you like don't, yeah, you're just erased so you can be this clean slate perfect baby to fill this void for these other people because they wanted a baby. And so instead of that, I would really advocate for open guardianships where you're still in a loving home with a family that loves you. That can be mom and dad or mom and mom or whoever, whatever adult wants like raise you in a conscious loving way, but still know where you came from, can still like eat the food your people eat or speak the language like your people eat. It was like so hard for me not to be able to speak Spanish growing up because everybody still now comes up to me and speaks Spanish. And I'm just like, lo
So,
siento.
I mean, so what do you think about the whole like celebrities? Always it's a
Yeah.
bit, they highlight them. Although, say they adopt some African babies. It's very.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of celebrities have done it. Or
Yeah, it totally does.
I
There's been,
think,
so like, if you look at the history of adoption, there's been different waves of like adoption being popular. And like, for example, in the 1950s, it was like when upstanding teenage girls got pregnant and they would just like disappear for 9 months. There was like that kind of bundle of babies being handed out.
mm,
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's like, and they're called different things. I should have like had this information prepared, but I don't.
that's all right.
Um, no, that's okay. And then I was kind of in the wave of like the late 80s, 90s babies being adopted out. And then 10 years later, this wave of like kind of a white celebrities adopting non-white babies. Yeah, I think it just totally reinforces the same kind of shit that we've been told about adoption when this happens, especially when they're such high profile people. First of all, adoption is such a personal story. There's like kids' stories and backgrounds and where they're from and all these things that are their stories to tell, not like tabloids or adoptive parents. Even on like Facebook groups, you're like, my adoptive child is suffering from this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is this kid's business. And you're like talking shit about their birth family or whatever else. It's like so it's just so ignorant. It's really, really ignorant when you have not done the work to educate yourself. And I think it's again the thing with intent not being more important than how you're making the people feel. So, do I think all of their intent was like with love? Yeah, I do. I don't know. I don't think they're all like horrific human beings or
No.
something. I think people think when it comes to adoption, like love is enough. And it's not. Love is not enough. Love is definitely part of it that you need to have, of course. Like kids need to be loved, you know, and taken care of and housed and like feel safe. They need all of these things. But when it comes to adoption and especially transracial adoption, you also need to do a lot of work to like back that up to make them feel like seen and heard and taken care of. And talking to I mean, half, no, more than half, I would say like 90% of the people I talked to were raised from my project were raised in like predominantly white neighborhoods. And they were like the adopted kid, you know? So I
Yeah, yeah,
think,
I agree. I think that would, like, if it was school, be it was the adopted kid, you know?
yeah, my brother and I were the adopted
Uh,
kids, you know?
yeah.
And this other kid,
It's
Jack.
like
So how do I feel about these celebrities doing it? I think they should stop and spend their money like supporting the communities so people don't need to like give their babies up for
yeah,
adoption. Yeah.
it's a good point. You mentioned it's in your bio, you used to go by your biological name,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So my before this DNA test and this rejection of my birth mom and like me kind of really intensely changing gears and being like, this is what I need to be making. I was Annie Goodchild, and there's like music from me
Isn't that a
that's
random name for adopted? Adoptee, good child.
yeah. Oh, okay. So what's really intense about that, which I only unpacked recently, Good Child was a name that I like made up for myself because I
Oh,
like
okay.
really, really didn't identify with my adoptive father's like German Austrian last name, not ever. Um, and so like before my first release with my old band way back in the day, I was like, I need to find like a cool name. And there was this character in this book that was like just on one page, like a really minuscule random character. And their last name was Goodchild. And I was like, cool. Annie Goodchild. It like sounded like old school. I don't know. Like,
But
yeah.
also
So
Annie.
yeah, Annie's that's my
Oh,
adoptive
really?
parents
Isn't
gave me
that
that
kind of
name.
odd? I don't know.
Yeah, yes. Oh God, this. Okay, cool. I've been in Europe and a lot of people don't know
Oh,
like
because it's
Annie, like
American, I
yeah,
guess,
but yeah.
musical. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there was like horrendous fights in my house growing up, being like, how could you name me after the most famous orphan of all time? Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? Can I swear? Can I swear on this
Yeah,
thing?
you can. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was like, what the fuck? I mean, there was like a lot of like full blowouts, just like, and so I was named after my adoptive mother's great aunt who like everybody loved, and she was this jolly Irish woman, like a lot of the women in her family. And it for me, it felt like a name I really didn't identify with at all, and not my adoptive father's last name at all. So that yeah, that was really hard, and I find it really weird that I picked the last name Goodchild now, thinking back onto it, being like, oh God, is that was that some like subconscious like I want to be a good child, I want people to love me and want me, and like it could be. That's so fucked. If it is,
Mhm.
that's so sad. So
Did
yeah.
and did your biological father tell you your real name then, or how did you find out?
So no, because they erase your identity, so you're a clean
Oh,
slate,
so
baby, when you're
they
adopted.
give you a brand new birth certificate.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes
yeah,
okay.
totally.
So yeah,
Which
you're
is
mentioning that. So they literally get
they'd
rid of
like delete
your
your
whole past,
existence. Yeah,
and then try
yeah,
to. It's almost like a pet, you know. When people get pets, they change
exactly.
their name.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
that's exactly what it is. I'm like, the one thing I could have had in
yeah.
life for my family was you keeping my birth name, the name that they wanted for me, which was Samantha, which is
Did
why I used to be Sam, is the name of this project.
did you find that that happened to everybody that have you talked to for the most
Oh
part?
yeah, when you're adopted, they like clean slate
Oh,
erase your
wow, humans.
yeah, humans. Yeah, there's this really like awful, you can like hashtag it. There's this like super cringy, really dehumanizing term called gotcha day, that like people call like their adoption day of their kids, like, gotcha, like scooped you up, picked you up at the store. Now you're
Oh,
mine, like gotcha
these are
day.
parents
Yeah. These
posting
are
this?
parents. Yeah,
Yeah.
posting this. Yeah, it's oh God, I really hate this term so much. It's just super dehumanizing. It's like it
Yeah.
is like a pet. And I think it is like just so indicative of the adoption industry. Like it's for the adoptive parent when it should be what can we do to benefit the kid or the baby or the teen the absolute most,
Well,
you
like you
know?
said, it's a business,
It is a
you know,
business.
and when businesses make money, they, you know,
Yeah.
do the right thing sometimes. You do
I would
have
say
a
a lot of the times in the adoption
yeah, I'm trying to
industry.
be give him benefit of the doubt, but I agree with you.
No, it's rough. I mean, there's so much coercion of of birth mothers who are really talked out of keeping their babies. That happened to a few of the people that I talked with for my EP, including one person who then went and got to meet their birth mother, and they were like, yeah, they wouldn't let me hold you. I was like crying and I was trying to hold you and trying to decide if I wanted to keep you or not, and they like took you away from me, and like all this fucking like awful heartbreaking stuff. And it's to make money. There's like, yeah, God, there's you check it out, look at the history of people making money off of
No, I'm
most of
sure.
the time brown and black mothers giving up their
Well,
babies for
I know it's
adoption.
not cheap. So
No,
yeah,
no, it's not. And it's more expensive to adopt white babies. And kind of the darker you go, the less expensive you get, which is also totally fucked up.
mm,
Kind of just puts a value on babies' heads and race. So yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot to unpack there.
Well, we don't need to go down the dark end right
No, no, we
now.
don't. We can talk about music, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, just disclaimer. Yes, this is music about transracial adoption in my experience, but this is also music about like self-love and
Yeah.
love and fear and abandonment and kind of a lot of themes I think a lot of
Yeah.
people deal with in general. I think it's possible if you had no idea that that's what this EP was about, you could just enjoy the
Yeah,
songs, you know?
I had no idea. I was just enjoying
Yeah,
it, and you could take it for whatever you take it and whatever makes you
totally.
feel.
Growing up, I had, other than Annie the musical, yikes, I had no art form to mirror my experience. I was so passionate about music for so long, and there was no album I could listen to that was talking about what I was going through. So it was really important for me to create this music for some like adopted kid sitting down being like, I mean, adoption is it's still like taboo. There's still so much shame about it. People don't talk about it. And it's still such a kind of lonely experience to have.
Why do you think that?
I mean, I think up until recently, people didn't talk about being adopted, especially if it was a not transracial adoption, because, yeah, it was like shameful to some people or embarrassing for people because it would other you in some way, you know? But like, what was wrong with you? Why didn't your parents want you, you know, or whatever it was?
Mm.
So I really wanted to make music to mirror my experience and to mirror other adoptees' experiences too.
Tasty Tuesdays! Thanking you for your time this time. Until next time, we'll see you again next week, same time, same channel.